Matt, welcome back. The annual or semi-annual show.
How many now? Is this five?
Maybe five, maybe six, five or six. I think
Five or
five. Yeah.
like, yeah, I was trying to figure that out the other day. I was like, when did I first come on? I was like, is that like, was it like 21 maybe? Maybe even 20.
Um, 20 or 21. Yeah. I about a month ago I did a seminar and your name's always brought up. And I was like, I feel like Matt always gives me his time because I found him when he was just writing Simply Faster articles.
I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
I
Before
appreciate that.
anything else even existed. Yeah,
Before I became a man.
that's right.
Yeah.
Before the deep tier didn't exist at the time,
Didn't even
which is yes.
in the background it did, just not in
Yeah.
the foreground of everything being put forward. Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. Since then, yeah, it's like I think about those first conversations that we had. It's weird. I don't know if you feel like that. The more that I do educationally, the more I'm like, 3 years ago, I had no idea what I was talking about. I get like that sometimes.
Different. Yeah, and like doing more seminars. So I've done like two the past couple months,
Hmm.
and I'm starting to learn that coaches particularly have a good idea of like when a drill should be used, where it should be used, but don't have the technical model in mind of what exactly it should look like and what they should do if it's not what it looks like or what it should look like. So I'm
Yeah.
kind of like reframing right now, like how I'm
Yeah.
going about doing all of this stuff because people see value in it,
Yeah.
but it's all right. So now I got to educate it a little bit differently than I was before.
Yeah. I mean, my version of that has been I had a lot of cool. This is what the pliers that I'm presenting on, yeah, should look like. This is how it can be scaled within our system. But the conversation always goes back to like, what are the nuances? Like, how do I understand why this movement is more intense than this movement? How do I always scale movement effectively, whether it's like pre-plyometric movements into very rudimentary forms, into what are the different, so like now I deliver a component of increasing intensity based on movement patterns, increasing intensity based on amplitude of movement, increasing intensities based on changes of direction of momentum. And so like there's been
Yeah.
so many more layers that have been like added onto this. And I've tried to I think it's genuine just feedback coming back to me, whether it's vocalized or just a feeling that I get after it. Um, and it just continually renews like your thought process. And hopefully that's the better way of being, right? As a coach, just to be like, cool, I can improve on this because I'm sure there's a few that are like, this is the way, this is the only way, and I'll present on this for 20 years. But yeah, I think if I was to watch back a seminar like 3 or 4 years ago, I'd probably cringe a little bit in comparison to how much better it feels now for me in terms of the feedback that I get. So um, yeah, I just love doing it. I love that face-to-face educational component. I think there's just so much fun in that.
It really is the way to do it. And to get people up and moving.
Oh,
I'm such a proponent of you learn so much more by doing it versus just watching it. And yeah,
yeah,
watching it is a huge part of it, but it helps you learn like what are you feeling? What are you experiencing? What drill helped you get over this hump or this like barrier in a
yeah.
way?
Yeah, exactly. And then you have so much more feedback to provide to someone to be like, oh, yeah, I experienced that. That's why you can't do that. So we need to use this regression or, break down this component to improve this issue that we both experienced. If you've never had any problems, you've never done it, it's just like, how would you begin to go about coaching this? It really, unless you like everyone's in quick fix life nowadays, right? Unless you want to literally coach it for 15 years, just do it. Do it for 6 months and you'll you'll have one up on someone that's never done it.
Yeah. It's funny, like talking about like how you're dividing up like the progressions based on amplitude and all of these other things. It's
Mm,
like I go over like all of the movement patterns. We do a practical about that. Then the next part is like where I'm talk about programming and we talk about progressions. And I'm like, well, the time of the drill is one of them. The speed going into a cut is one of them. The angle of the cut is another one. The
yeah,
number of changes of direction is another one.
yeah,
So then it's like everyone's like stops for a second, like, all right, I gotta like figure all of this
yeah,
stuff out. But ultimately it's like, what is the speed when someone needs to strike the ground in order to change direction? That is like the
yeah.
number one thing. And if you
That's
just
it.
take that away, that helps everything else a little bit more.
Yeah. Well, and there's like multitudes of layers of intensity, right? Is it intensity like pure central nervous system intensity? Is
Yeah.
it intensity over duration, like you say, like time-based intensity, like the sensational like RPE is starting to increase as well? Or is it just like I am able to create the most intensity in a given movement? Like I tell this to people all the time, like the difference between like intensity and complexity is very different. Just because something's getting more complex doesn't mean that it's getting more intense. You might think
A
that it's
100%.
hard.
Yes.
It's not a hard and easy based thing. Actually, the most intense movements should be the least complex. Because as soon as you make it too complex, it is going to
Yes.
be on the central nervous system, it's going to have less of an effect overall. Now, then people come back to you, well, what about the effects on the, fine stability muscles? I'm like, cool, yeah, sure. It's intense in that different realm. But your main movers, your big muscles, your big tendons aren't getting the stimulus from the high complexity component. So yeah, there's like layers to the intensity, right? There's different forms of intense. How
Yes.
you comprehend intensity is very different. So yeah, man, the change of direction stuff, you got it. You got your work cut out for you. There's just
I
so
do.
many
Well,
layers.
because like one other progression is just coordination, because there might not be more speed into a movement. It might just be doing a couple relatively fast together.
Yeah.
And because of the directions that you're actually moving, it
Mm,
makes it hard to time and sequence everything. Not necessarily because speed is higher or more intense prior
yeah.
to doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's fun.
That's the best thing, right? It just you just constantly be like, oh, what a great way to put that. And I like that's like straight into the next presentation that you do, or straight into the next seminar you do. It's just another way to be like, bingo. That's how I want to present that. That's what I continually do. I'm like, oh, that makes way more sense to present it like that for someone. And people will just wrap their heads around it way easier than me. Like you say, there's this to consider and this to consider and this, like just simplify it, make it easy. And then your goal, or is how I've kind of approached it. My goal is to give coaches the analytical observational lens to then be able to say, cool, now I
That's the goal. Yep.
understand how to take this a step further. I
Yep.
understand the crude like base of everything and the real like meat and potatoes of it. But so many people start with the fine, foie gras that goes around the meat and potatoes. And actually they need to learn the meat and potatoes before they can go out into those like tertiary things that ultimately don't matter with 90% of your population that you're working with. You just need to get velocity in and out of good quality changes of direction, right? And you need to be able to do it both sides and at different angles. That's our goal
Yeah.
probably, right? But it's everyone wants to overcomplicate that by adding in, we talk about the complexity element. Let's make it more complex. You'd be like, man, you'd be so much better if you just able to time these 10 movements better.
Yeah. I mean, everything comes down to creating better stability in different patterns in order to create more power out of that pattern.
Yeah.
And there's a
Boom.
whole bunch to that.
Yep.
Um, Thinking about this too, I get asked all the time, Where do you start? I have a 10-year-old. What would I do? I have a 16-year-old. What would I do? It's funny because my answer is always exactly the same. You have to start by understanding the actual patterns of movement first. And if you
Yep.
don't know those, then we cannot progress. There has to be a foundation. Same
Yep.
thing with what you do with all the plyo stuff. There has to be the foundation. And thinking about that, I know you just worked with like a bunch of people for the combine. How do you go about when there is such a short period of time that you need someone to reach a certain level? How do you kind of fit that in within that small window, particularly for like bigger guys, like offensive linemen?
Like using that example, so using combine guys, we had offensive linemen, we had tight ends. Probably the lightest guy probably weighed like 270 in the whole group. Um, and most of them are 6'1" plus. So you don't just have weight, but you have big bodies to get into deep, acute angles, right? Which is
Yeah.
two things that don't mix particularly well. Um, and actually, the proficiency of getting these guys into the right positions and timing it more effectively became way more of a superpower than anything, I think. So, like, they knew the movement patterns. So if they had to do a 5-10-5, or they had to
Yeah, yeah,
uh,
yeah.
or they had to do like specific movements past the crude tests. It was very much like these are the positions that we need you to hit. When you add what you assume as like your highest velocities to be able to do this, like complete 180 cut, this is what happens. So it almost came back to take 10% of your speed off of that just so you can get in and out of that motion better,
Yes,
because
yeah.
you've got like I'm stood next to these guys and I weigh like almost over 100 pounds less than them, and I'm like, you've got 100 pounds more than me that's sending you continually in that forward direction. I don't have to deal with anywhere near as much force as you do when we run at the same velocity to get in and out of that. So if you're not in the right position and you're not able to handle the velocity, it's completely pointless. You can try and push and push and push, but you're banging your head against the wall. So it became, let's just groove these movements, like do it well timed, do it at an intensity that you feel comfortable with, which is, it seems pretty basic, but everyone wants to force things. And I'm like, I just don't feel the need to force something with a guy that is that much heavier. So it was like we were timing it. We were like, what speed are you taking through this gate? Cool. Let's drop it down to, X speed.
Yeah.
And the overall speed of this whole thing improved because you're spending like 3/10 of a second less on that turn. So it became more about getting to positions. Like, are you putting the feet in the right position? Are you, because they're talking to me about these are the angles that I need to get into. And I'm like,
Yeah.
you can't handle the velocity, let alone get into that position.
Yep. And it's different too because like when you're doing the combine, you have to like reach to touch the line. It's not like you would ever do that in an actual game. You wouldn't, that
Exactly.
would be the worst thing to do.
Exactly. So I mean, we had some offensive linemen that did not want to yield into any deep form of knee flexion.
You have to. You don't have a choice. Yeah.
So you have to. I'm like, bro, you got to touch that line. So like,
Yeah.
what do we do? How do we solve the problem of doing that? Um, Now we were doing a little bit of deep tier yielding stuff, which I definitely think helped. Just like, okay, I am safe actually getting into this deep position. We had two very opposing groups of people that were like that. Guys that could squat deep really nicely, and other guys that were squatting like LeBron James. Like it was like very like very
A
hyperextended,
flop. Yeah.
ass out, would not bend their knees. So it's like, yeah, it's we have to get into a position, but it's like, let's not force so much overload into it and speed into it that it is going to completely diminish how you're executing that. So the execution became really important. And then over time, it was like, oh, I feel way more freer to just actually take more speed into this. And
Yeah.
and, and you have kind of those laughing moments where they're like, oh shit, that was way too much speed on that one. I'm like, yeah, let's wait a few more weeks before you can take that much more speed in. But they started to understand that And Rich was a real advocate of this. Rich Burnett was like, we did a lot of like smooth and groove. Like we would do like a shuffle into a cutback, a shuffle into a cutback, and
Yeah, 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 yeah.
we would do high repetitions. And it's like, cool. If we're doing a set of 10 changes of direction, just going back and forth, at the 10th one is where we have maybe the most speed. So it's like nice and light and easy. And then it was like, cool, now I can start to find my feet in this. And it became, ultimately, it's volume. It's volume for them. That was
Yeah.
what it
Yeah,
was
yeah.
volume. So it was nice to have guys that spend all of their life like maximally like everything's push, 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 to be like, let's do something that's a little bit more rhythmical. And it went the same for us working on max velocity speed stuff. I'm like, boys, this is
Yeah.
when you get upright. This is about rhythm and control. It's about holding things together. It's not about pushing. You're not accelerating anymore between 25 and 40, especially for these guys. But they want to stand up straight away as a lineman. Their job is literally to stand up and stop someone plowing through them.
Yeah.
So um, yeah, it felt like it was more of a rhythmical, putting your body in the right positions before anything. And that was for like 10 weeks of it until we could actually like fully let the reins off of them.
I always think this about linemen too. It's like their number one job is to like resist someone pushing past them. So they're trying to resist rotation all the time. If someone pushes a shoulder and they open up,
Yeah,
they've gotten beat.
yeah, yeah,
But then when you have to go into changes of direction, one of the key components is rotating your trunk,
definitely.
your the new direction rapidly. So
Yeah,
it's like you're doing the opposite almost of
yeah,
what they've always tried to do, which is just maintain
yeah,
stiffness. And then like as you're talking about that, I'm just thinking like, how would I go about that? Like a big group of guys. And I always think like, all right, my model of movement is like minimal time on the ground, decreased amounts of knee flexion, trunk rotation, and new direction of travel. But it would almost be like depending on someone's leg limb height, because there's a fine line. If they just rotate the trunk too much, but they don't
yeah,
need to bend their knees too much, but they're trying to reach the line, they're
yeah,
going to be slow out of that. But if they sink too deep and don't rotate the trunk at all to help them reach the line, that's also going to be too slow.
yeah,
So it's like finding that line for every
yeah.
guy
Well, and
to get out of that quicker. Yeah.
it was very much as well the same of like, we would bring up images of like this is like the best of the best in terms of guys that were doing the change of direction drills, whether they're doing like the L drill, 5-10-5, and they're like, "Whoa, look at the positions they're in," and I'm like, but you have to have a certain velocity to get into those shin angle positions
Yeah,
and to
you
have
do.
that form of trunk lean. You can't do that at sub speeds. So
You
they're like, oh,
cannot.
I can't find myself getting into that. I'm like, it's because you're not carrying the velocity. You can't expect like I mean, we've all done it, right? As young kids, you would want to mimic the people at the top. And you're like, great, you can mimic it all you like, but if you don't have the strength, the velocity into that movement, if you don't have the capacity to handle that angle at velocity, then the model has to continually develop. So like the model for the guys was developing within that 13-week period, 12-week period, which is crazy, really. And it's an ever developing thing. You want to achieve the same thing, but we don't have the velocity in, we're not going to be able to get into those positions to create the trajectory out. Otherwise, you're just creating false positions, aren't you?
Yeah. How did they, I guess, operate as far as like, did you have them before their strength work, before their speed work, after, or was it like all included within like their day kind of?
Yeah, so we would the two main days that I was involved with, we would have like a jumps and change of direction element on, I think it was like a Tuesday or a Monday, if I'm right, Monday or Tuesday, and like then they would lift after that, and we were working on, realistically, all the slower contact times were on the Monday or Tuesday. It was like acceleration,
Yeah.
change of direction, and then jump space stuff. Teaching them how to do a vert, teaching them how to do a broad, regularly testing them on the force plate. we would do a lot of conditioning based stuff. So a lot of the guys did drop quite significant weights, like body comp, rich. It was
It helps though. It helps big time.
it helps big time. It was the phrase was bodies by rich or whatever it was. And
Yeah.
there's pictures of them
Yeah.
all like topless at the end of the process. Some of the guys were dropping serious weight. So I saw one of them come back a few days ago and I was like, oh, we've gone back to a healthy weight because he'd shredded up quite a lot. I was like, you look like you've stacked on a few pounds. He's like, well, we haven't been training what felt like 3 times a day for and they at Triple F they helped them control all of their diet, everything. So it was like everything was real finite in terms of the work that we did.
Yeah.
So yeah, beginning of the week was more like longer ground contact times, and at the end of the week on Thursdays we were doing a lot more like learning how to run the 40. Um, and yeah, it was always kind of fit around a list. They would normally lift post that dynamic session. And we were there was obviously technical elements that were placed on other days in terms of like so on the Thursday we had to run the L drill because we were out on turf and they wanted to be on more specific surfaces to them.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense.
So you know sometimes operationally it has to just have to work rather than make complete perfect sense in a programming component. But what was really interesting was seeing like Rich did so much. There was such a like volume and capacity based component to what he did, and I think it fed really well to actually maybe a few other places that might focus way more on like the intensity side of things. Um, but I don't think that there are many places that are also doing like more of a focus towards offensive line and a few tight
Sure,
ends.
yeah.
Whereas other models are looking at,
It's
the
different.
wide
Yeah. Give
guys.
me the high speed guys on the outside. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Everyone
Yeah.
wants the sexy side of that, but it's like, you know what? For me doing the speed work and helping Rich out with the jump stuff, what they got faster. I can tell you that. They definitely got
Yeah.
faster. So it was cool. It's a really cool process to go through those guys.
That's awesome. Something else I've been focusing more on lately is like specific foot position on landings of plyos and trying to like
Mm,
pair those exact positions with like
mm,
positions of changes of direction. Because what I've started to see more and more is like there is a coordination piece to how the foot plants into the ground and the angle that it plants. Like if I'm moving to the side and I don't close my foot all the way, then weight shifts to my forefoot. I sink a little bit deeper into the landing
yeah.
and I'm a little bit slower coming out of that. It causes me to even rotate a little bit more. So really kind of honing in on, all right, when I'm doing this drill, I want this position, trying to match that plyo foot position even to the change
Mm,
of direction position.
mm,
And I guess just wondering when you're looking at landing positions, like obviously we want to a lot of the focus is on just getting quick off the ground. I guess what are you looking at when someone is kind of striking the ground in different and I'll say more like multi-directional
mm.
plyo type things.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely whether it's like 100% like conscious in how I program it, there's like elements of like crude, like be as reactive as possible, up and
Yeah,
down, chase the stuff. And then it's like when we move to more multi-directional elements, there is way more nuance in terms of, if I'm traveling, if I'm doing like forward movement into then like a complete reverse of going then into a backwards movement, what does that look like? What am I likely to see as opposed to if I'm to
sure.
turn
Yeah,
my
yeah.
foot out, like you're saying. So I I'm always going to want the reactive component to it, but I also have to be, pretty realistic with it and understand that in order for me to decelerate and then accelerate, I'm going to require a much deeper joint position. Now,
Yeah.
obviously, I can improve how quickly I can overcome those deeper joint positions, so I can use taller, stiffer, reactive. Like I can stand on the spot, I can take off forward, I can land by skewing my feet, let's say more to the left, and then trying to react back out of that. I do a few of those, which I really like, and you can kind
I
of,
like those a lot because like
yeah,
watching basketball players specifically, if they're doing any sort of step back,
yeah,
they'll turn that foot
yeah,
and try to create more of like a wedge of their leg versus
yeah,
allowing over short distances, you can get away with that. If you have more speed, there is going to be more kind of sinking deeper
yeah,
into that. So that is part of it too.
yeah. I think, and so I like to train both ends of the spectrum, and that I will use the really reactive versions, like those bounces back and forth, where I'm kind of going in and out.
Yeah.
I'll turn the left shoulder and get that right foot in, then I'll turn the right shoulder and get the left foot in. But then I'll also go the flip of it, and I'll do something really yielded, where I'll use a movement where I am getting into a much deeper, slower action, so that again, at both ends of the spectrum, I think it amplifies the position of the whole of your body, head to
Yeah.
toe. If I am not in the right position at a given point, like you're saying, if my foot's just slightly, everted out when it should be more inverted, then I'm going to lose rotational capacity. I'm going to lose the hip of being able to actually drive through a more stacked position. I can use the stiffer elements to orientate the whole of my body so that from head through hip through toe, I'm pendulum. I'm using like a pendulum effect of my whole body to shift my center of mass to then redirect in the right direction. So it's like I can test it in more yielding versions. I can test more at the VMO into the hip, into how I want to push out of that, and then I can test the how I want to react out of that at the other end of it. So I like to fill in both of those, and then the middle ground is actually it tends to then be taking speed into it and actually just doing like a running cut. Um,
Yeah.
because it has a little bit of yield, but based on me taking a certain level of speed into that, but also requires me to be really stiff and wanting to overcome away from that action. So, um, yeah, I think it fills in both ends of the spectrum. So I use I use it with my deep tier stuff. I use it with the light, medium, and ping tier stuff. Where depending on my demographic, if I've got a kid that cannot react to save his life when it comes to turning away from something, it's going to start in like real baby motions, and then we're going to scale that up over time. So yeah, I love to use those. I like to challenge a lot of foot positions outside of the center of my mass, even on doing things like if I'm doing like a pendulum side to side, like a slalom base side to side, I'll do that bilaterally. I'll do that in a split stance. So I get the inside edge of the foot, the outside edge of the foot. And again, there's so much to be had in finer stability muscles when I'm coming across my body. So that runs kind of medially up the inside of my leg, how my knee stabilizes. And then if I'm doing something laterally, so if I've got a right foot forward and a left foot back, and I'm sending my body out to the right, it teaches me whole system stiffness because I can see someone that can't handle the reactive element or the stress in a
Yeah.
lateral
Yeah.
movement because they'll fold at the hip and they just send their feet out. So again, it's about creating trust of actually proprioceptively in space. Do I feel comfortable in throwing my hips out there with my feet so that I can then traject out of that? So I use movements across the body a lot. And then moving on to a single leg, it just, it increases fourfold. Um, and that's been in my program for everyone from track athletes to, you know, multi-directional athletes that are on a field or a court. Um, because I get long jumpers that I'll watch them straight on and they're all over the show on the approach and they get to the takeoff and they put their
Yeah.
foot across them. And I've seen plenty of people that have blown out their ankle by not
Yeah.
being able to handle just a slight nuanced takeoff position. So like I want them to be prepared for that. And then if you're getting into change of direction sports, then I think it's gold to be able to actually know how to control the foot into that position and then be able to really get in and out of it effectively.
This is probably my favorite thing about your system is it appears to be very simple, but when you follow it, there are so many little tiny details to it to get a very specific outcome
Yeah.
for all of these different types of things.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
it. And actually, it's funny. Like, I was just thinking the other day, I was like, how do I simplify what I'm trying to say? And I was like, what would Matt do? Like, he really did a good job of taking it and making it so like easily digestible. And that's the
Mm,
tough part is
mm,
people say it all the time, like the best coaches take very complex things and make them very simple in nature.
mm.
And even like the things that they choose, the drills they choose, they're simple. The drills themselves are simple, but the reason they chose them and the outcome that they want to get out of them, that's what is really, really great about them.
Yeah. Well, and I think, the simpler you can make something, maybe the more robust and principle driven they are, and that, they
Yeah, yeah.
we understand that
Like principles don't change. The other things
principles,
might change, but you just fit within the
but
model of the principles. Yeah.
exactly. So like we understand biomechanically, we understand stress, we understand adaptation because certain stress. So when you deviate outside of creating the stress that you want, then you don't get the adaptations that we assume are happening. And so like there are only a certain few ways, like plyometrically, for me to leave the ground. And I deem it on my movement pattern scale of like there are 5 ways. You leap with 2 feet fixed, you leap with 2 feet split, you leap with 2 feet exchanging, and then you bound from one leg to the other, and then you hop. Like you could give me a combination of that, but there's probably
Yep.
not like those are 5 movement patterns. If we want to deviate outside of it, cool. That's for like 1% of the time and less. For everything else, that's it. That's all we need to focus on. Let's not, we can then be as complex as we like with those movement patterns. They can be light, they can be submaximal, they can be massively intense, they can be more yielded and deeper in ranges of motion. But the founding principle of it is, I think, as soon as you just, every time you go back to that, you'll be like, this is that part of the system. This is that part of
Yep.
the system. So,
Yeah. The tough part I have, so it's like the movement patterns of sport don't change. People are shuffling, performing a lateral run, back
yeah,
pedal, hip turns, curved run, and linear speed. The
yeah,
tough part is getting people to understand that those happen in every sport. And but what changes is not necessarily like some based on sport, but it is more based on the position that the athlete plays on the field. Like a
mm,
defender in soccer, yes, they're going to be moving forward, but a lot of the time they're going to be retreating and going backwards behind them. And even on depending on the side of the field, it will tend to do more movement patterns on one side versus the other. So
yeah,
it is getting that understanding. And
mm,
I'll tell you what's helpful is like going to YouTube and showing like, here's what I'm talking about. Here's an example of somebody doing it in the sport. And then
yeah, yeah,
even last week, like I was at the New York Red Bulls and trying to explain like, this is how we should execute a lateral run. Here's a guy doing it in order to create a shot.
yeah,
And it was still kind of like, well, shouldn't we like cross over our legs like this way? And I was like, did you not just watch the video I just showed? Yeah, that
yeah,
was like so, but it's tough. And a lot of it is there isn't a background of like education on how to go about doing the movements. There's a
mm,
lot on sets and reps and programming, but
yeah,
not a lot on, you're just relying on how were you taught when you were in
yeah,
sport as a kid.
yeah,
And
yeah.
it was like whatever your coach, whoever's dad told you to do something, that's
Yeah.
what
Well,
you
you know
kind of
what's
see in
crazy
your head.
is
Yeah.
the US are very like you teach people how to like basketball, the example, like defensively glide.
Yeah.
And I'm like, and I had never until I was 18 when I started to play a little bit of basketball, I had never heard anyone teach me how to move like lateral. Like, no, I just do it. Like it just
Yeah.
it was happening. And then I went into a sport that it's not British. Like basketball is as American as it comes to a British person. So like they're teaching me how to glide. I'm like, dude, this is slow. Like what? Like why is this so crudely taught to me? It's all I wanted to do was just get into a position and organize myself,
Yep.
accordingly. And it was like, yeah, I think that there's again, it comes back to the principle side of things, right? Like you said, like about that guy was laterally running or something, trying to get into a position, and they're like, "Oh, what? Maybe we should be teaching him how to do." And you're like,
Yeah.
"But the play does the play dictate how this is going to happen?" When we talk about soccer players and how they run like way more like anteriorly pelvically dumped, it's like, well, yeah, sure. They can't lift their knees as they tap a soccer ball moving up the
They
field.
have to. Yeah,
They have
it's
to be
just how
bit
it
of
works.
power.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, the models are, we're trying to cram them into a sport. And it's like, well, no, the sport's going to dictate the models. And from there, I think that we find the principles and then say, well, how do we improve the principal form of movement within that? Yeah, that's kind of how I see it. But yeah, it's
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah.
And I always think it's like once you have the model in your head, the best athletes tend to figure it out on their own, right? Like the 1%. But there's always like little tiny things you could do to improve that. And I always think it goes back to the idea of like how we move is a skill. And if you are never taught it, you could get to a certain level. And
Yeah.
depending on how good of an athlete you are, you could even excel really well.
Hmm.
But there's always something little that you could probably do to improve that positioning even just a little bit more when you're taught by a coach.
Yeah. 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 I think that's what I wasn't taught. I was just told to do it. It's like, right, we're going to drill this. You're just going to do it and do it
Yeah.
and do it. It's not like, but like positionally, like, but what are, like, how am I going to get this thing faster? Not just doing
Yeah.
the thing. I think it's
That's
like,
it.
here are the drills, great. But like the nuance behind actually how I want to improve this can't just be doing the thing over and over again. It is going
Yep.
to diminish at a certain point. And it normally diminishes with injury. That's
Yeah,
right.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, true. So what is next for you? What are you working on?
I'm always, I think, I mean, going back to what we mentioned at the start, it was like educationally, systematically, how do I develop the system that we have and we use? Um, and it goes back to putting it into other situations and scenarios. So like this idea of dynamic longevity and like lifelong movers is really sparking my interest at the moment. It's like, how do I get a 70-year-old woman to move dynamically and to add longevity to her life as a
Yeah,
mover?
yeah. I don't know. You posted like an old woman doing some jumps and stuff. Yeah, I was like, wow,
It's
that's
impressive, right?
impressive. I just saw just last weekend was the or 2 weekends ago was the Penn relays.
Yeah,
And I saw like a 90-year-old or I think maybe it was the 80 plus category. Guy
amazing.
ran 100 in like 16 seconds.
Yeah,
And I actually thought in my head like
could I?
I might be training the next like 40 years for that.
Yeah, but like that's like
If I just
if you're
keep
not,
doing what I'm doing,
yeah.
I'm gonna be at least at the starting line.
Exactly, exactly. And I think if you're not going to do track and field, which if I would recommend anything to like a 40-year-old guy, it's like start masters track and field because it's awesome. Do a decathlon, like do the decathlon. It is great. You're going to throw, you're going to run, you're going to hurdle, you're going to
Yeah,
jump. It's awesome. It's just the degree of different things to do. You're going to be moving at high speeds. You're going to be throwing big implements. You've got to throw your center of mass. And you've got to be cardiovascularly as fit as anything. Um, but if not, like I'm trying to figure out in my head like what this would be like as like a weekly pursuit of dynamic longevity. Can I get people to yield effectively? Can I get them back to being reactive or maintaining reactivity? And how much of this has an effect on like the functionality of their tissue for lifelong pursuits. the fall industry is a multi-billion dollar industry. So if I can teach someone to catch themselves more reactively when they trip and also have the bone density not to just shatter into 1,000 pieces when
Yeah,
my
to
hip
actually
hits the
stop.
ground,
Yeah.
can I stop? Or if I do fall and trip, do I have robust tissue? And so, yeah, it's been a nice thing. I mean, people might be hating the content, and that's cool. I don't care. I'm just on a little adventure of my own, but it's only going to bring back, I think, quality to the performance side of things that I do. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
I want to
Absolutely.
deviate in all these different ways to come back to this center point of like it's just human performance ultimately. So, and it really intrigues me to see how long we can maintain like good quality of tendon health, muscular stiffness, and so forth. So that's where I'm
I'll
at.
tell you what, I think if you do it regularly, like it goes away not nearly as quickly as people think it does.
Yeah, yeah,
And I mean, I'll be 40 this summer, and I'm like, I'm still hitting the same numbers I was like 5 or 6 years ago right
yeah,
now. Like I time myself all the time doing stuff. I'm like, I feel like I could keep doing this at least another good while here
yeah,
without a massive drop off.
yeah, yeah. I think in 5 years' time, if you reflected back to it and you had a good bill of health and continue to do it, I think I think not a lot will change. There's I mean, there's evidence of world-class sprinters that have continued into their late 30s, early 40s. 40s. Kim Collins was a great example, ran sub 10 at 41. And I think that there's, if I can get it right, limb velocity stays, impulse is the thing that changes.
Yeah.
So our ability to create larger impulses change. So you would probably see in that 80-year-old that did that 100 meters at Penn Relays, they probably had a pretty good stride
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
frequency. It's
The
just
length
the
was not the
the
same. Yeah.
stride length is not the same. So
Yeah.
I think that's my piece, and the same with yourself. Like that's our piece of like how can we instill that longevity as well? How can we keep people creating force at that level as well as doing it at such a fast speed? Um, so yeah, it's just part of the equations that I'm trying to figure out. If I was to scale it for a 40-year-old to a 70-year-old, what does that look like?
Yeah. Well, awesome. Always a great conversation. Can you tell people where they can find you?
You can find me on Instagram, McInnes Watson. You will find me. Type the Plyo Guy. I'm sure you'll find me that way as well.
Yep.
But yeah, I appreciate you, man. It's always so good to yeah to just talk shop, and we kind of just went with it today, span with it, and I'm glad that we did because it just leads us down loads of different avenues. So I appreciate you.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you, Matt.
Appreciate it.